Ainda não. Ainda tá. Só eu botei o pé no. Programa. Caramba. Levando o pau. É essa aqui, né? Eu só vou. Nossa. Acho que vai dar para ler, sim, não vai. Talvez fechar aqui pela persiana já vai ajudar bastante. Melhorou bastante já. A gente trouxe o passador de slides?
Yeah.
Tá.
Eles não vão ter nada para trazer para mostrar, tá?
Tá. Talvez dê também.
Não vai ficar o. Mas.
Se eu ficar aqui.
Isso.
Dá para trazer mais. Preciso ler minhas notas. Tem que... Ou põe aqui mesmo. Não, tá bom. Não. Tudo bem. Okay. Olha que você lançou, né? Ah, tá.
Você tem uma leitura
Tem.
inicial? Se você quiser fazer uma
Ah, tá.
leitura enquanto eu vou lançando. Então. Deixa eu botar a música.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here with us. I know I'm standing in the way between you and all the pasta, but hang in there, please. We'll start today with the harmonization text from the book Our Daily Bread by Emmanuel from psychographed by Francis Xavier. And the text title is Anxieties, given our talk today. And the passage from the Gospel that Emmanuel interprets is from Peter, and it's cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Emmanuel says, anxieties trigger many crimes on earth and are never constructive. Invariably, the anxious man has all the odds against him. In opposition to anxious, disquieting moments, the lessons about the patience of nature appear in every sector of human pathways. If man is born to be constantly anxious, it would be as if to say that he had to come to this earth not in the category of sanctifying laborer, but rather as a desperate, unpardonable soul. If human beings could reflect more sensibly, they would be able to recognize the actual context of service that the moments of each day can offer. They would try to be more vigilant and give proper value to their own assets. Undoubtedly, the scenery changes constantly, obliging us to encounter unpleasant surprises as a result of our inadequate attitudes while experiencing happiness or pain. However, an essential imposition of the law obliges us to proceed daily in the direction of goodness. Anxiety will try to coerce gentle hearts because the terrestrial pathways unfold many dark corners and almost unsolvable problems. Nevertheless, let us not forget the prescription that Peter has given us. Place your concerns and disquieting fears in the hopes you have in the celestial Father, because divine love desires the well-being of all of us. It is just to ardently desire the victory of light, to persevere in search of peace, to discipline yourselves for your own union with the superior planes, to insist in synchronizing with the more evolved spheres. However, bear in mind that anxiety always precedes a fall. Let us pray. So let's close our eyes, calm ourselves down, bring our thoughts into our hearts. And gently realize that we're all here today to do something that God has asked us to do, to reflect about Jesus' teachings, to evolve ourselves morally. So we thank God for letting us have this moment, for allowing us to have the intelligence to understand, to comprehend, and to reflect upon his laws and upon his teachings. And from that, we'd like to ask God, please give us the strength that we need to make these reflections daily, for us to be able to take our daily burden and transform them slowly into our virtues, bringing us closer and closer to our happiness. So be it. I'm just going to copy the link to and okay, welcome everybody. And today we'll be talking about anxiety, and this is part 2 of our talk. It's based on Spiritual Healing of Anxiety by Elidio Sequeira. He's got 6 videos on it, and we've divided into 2 parts. This being the second. There's 9 hours of videos, and we try to compress it into 2, so I do encourage everybody to actually watch it. This one in particular, there's 5.5 hours of material, so there's a lot more out there for us to reflect on and try to take the major points. And we'll discuss about anxiety. Have I let this feeling cloud my thoughts? And if I have, how can I bring serenity into my life and try and transform this anxiety? The initial thoughts or reflection that we'll start with is, do I understand what anxiety is, or what causes anxiety in my life? The second one is, do I have full trust in God? Do I actually trust God, or is it a conditional trust? And the third one is, have I been applying the apprentice feeling in my life? In everything that we do, in all our experiences. So hopefully we're able to reflect a little bit, and we'll start with the anxiety. Like, what causes anxiety? Why do we feel this anxious feeling? And it comes from a spirit that's temporarily lost. Why do we feel lost? Because we usually live in a material and superficial lifestyle, right? We distance ourselves from who we truly are and from God. And this distance causes us a feeling of uncertainty that we don't think we'll be able or capable of going through all of our experiences. And we start to feel anxious about what is to come. We start to fear the future, and that causes us this anxiety that we talk about. Elidio, true self, and then the ego is our ignorance. We all have these feelings, limiting ourselves from our own true self. We have the self and the ego collapsing, fighting against each other. We know that we can never transform a negative feeling into a virtue if we're fighting against each other. There's no winner, because this is only us within ourselves. So this distance, it just starts to grow and grow and grow, and the ego starts to take over itself, or we become egoic beings. Now, if we understand ourselves as immortal spirits, if we start to reflect about ourselves, to learn who we truly are, with the bads and the goods, the ego and the self, they're not collapsing anymore. Now they're working together, because we understand that we have our ego, We understand it's there, but it's no longer the driver of our actions. The self becomes the driver of our actions, and the ego is no longer a problem to us. Now it's just something there that needs to be worked on, but it's not hindering us from evolving. And the 5 feelings that Alito talks about for us to help us learn about ourselves are reflecting upon our self-esteem, our self-worth, our self-respect, self-confidence, and self-acceptance, because that helps us realize how far we've come and helps us love ourselves, right? Bringing us closer to who we truly are. So now we're no longer hating the ego, right? We're loving the self and the ego together and making them work together for our own evolve, for our own mission. It's just interesting to remind ourselves that we're all on Earth here, so it is a planet of trials and expiations. So we all have these negative or egotistical feelings. We all have anxiety. What are the other ones that he mentioned? Jealousy, vanity, pride, selfishness. We all have this, right? But if we are going through the path of self-love, we understand that we have them, but we also understand that we're capable of transforming them into virtuous feelings. I know I'm capable of doing that. I'm not fighting with myself anymore, but I'm working with myself. And the fissure, the distance that we talked about, that's what a fissure is on the soil. This distancing that causes between our ego and ourselves just generates a mistrust, a lack of confidence in myself, in my life, and in God, which in turn generates our anxiety, right? Because now we don't trust on ourselves, we don't think we're capable. So that makes us anxious. The Alito says that the refusal against the divine laws for not feeling sons and daughters of God disconnects us from the universe, from the loving energies of the universe. And it's crucial here to understand that once we distance ourselves from these loving energies of the universe, we fall into a sense of belonging. We feel like we no longer belong in this universe because everything is wrong, right? Everything needs to be changed, and I don't feel that I'm part of the universe anymore. Which generates 2 types of movements: the existential doubt, where I doubt everything that I am, and an existential emptiness, which comes from me not having the sense of belonging. So now I feel empty inside. There's nothing that fulfills truly my own self. And then I go out and look for other things to fill my heart, be it in, could be adventures, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be anything that we do to try and fulfill that emptiness inside, when the only type we could use is to again bring us back that sense of belonging in the universe, basically. And then Alito says, where does this come from? Why do we lose the sense of belonging? Why do we always go away from who we truly are, even though we're not, even though we're suffering? Right? It comes from, in lame terms, our laziness, basically. And deep down, we all know that we should be making efforts to change or to transform our morals, but we choose not to. Right? We rather stay in the comfort of our couch instead of improving ourselves. So the reflection here is there's 3 types of invitations that we get from our experiences from God. The first ones, they come still in a loving way. And because it's in a loving way, we're comfortable on the couch, so it still doesn't bother us. So we choose not to take those experiences and evolve from them. Then it comes the pain. So then the next invitation comes in pain, And so it starts poking us, and it's an itch, and that we're a little uncomfortable, but we might still be okay with it. So we still decide to stay on the couch and not to move forward until the latest one. From pain, you get to the suffering, which is when we can't no longer bear that pain or that suffering, so we actually decide to stand up and do something about it. So those are the three invitations that God gives us. Now, if we're reaching our virtuous path, which is at the top here, we have the first invitations from love, then pain, then suffering. So if I accept and submit to my mission and choose to improve from a loving invitation, I'm much closer to that virtue. But the longer I wait, the longer it goes from pain to suffering, the further I am from that virtue being developed. So I can for sure develop at any stage, but coming out of suffering to developing the virtue will be a path much longer. So why don't we take the invitation that we're getting right now and actually choose to develop our virtues, even though they're from love. Sometimes it's hard to see them as invitations. If we reflect about our own self, about our own experiences, we can find those subtle invitations that we get to change. And this brings us to what a leader described as a circumstantial and existential doubt. So the circumstantial doubt, those are the doubts that we have on our everyday life. Do we choose to go left or right, or which job should I choose, or what should I do today? So those are doubts that we have constantly in our lives, and that's natural. Those doubts are natural. Now, if we decide to take those doubts with apprentice feeling, right, understanding that I'm an apprentice of life, those doubts don't generate anxiety. If I don't see them as an apprentice feeling, then these doubts will generate anxiety. And they come every day in our lives. So through the apprentice feeling, realize that whichever path I take, whichever choice I make, will either result in something good or something bad, but I'll be able to learn from it. Right? It's that apprentice feeling that we talk about. So it'll take away the anxiety from our doubt. Now, if we keep on fighting, and we decide not to use the apprentice feeling, the circumstantial doubt starts to grow and grow, becoming an existential doubt. And that's a much more not important, but what's the word? Grave, a much more what? Serious, thank you. A much more serious doubt, because it's no longer our daily and frivolous doubts, but now it's something deep inside. And Enlido says that at this point, that's when we start to rebel against God. That's when we start to rebel against the divine laws. We don't think they're right. We start to think that we are better than the divine laws or God, eventually leading us from that fissure, from distancing ourselves from who we truly are, leading to anxiety, and then a generalized anxiety towards depression and even suicidal thoughts, right? So it starts small, but it can definitely grow into something a lot more serious. Thanks, Carol. So now we'll be talking about God quite a bit, because we said distancing ourselves from us, distancing ourselves from God, from our divine laws. We'll try to understand a little bit what it means to trust in God. So when we talk about distrust in God, there's two types of people, basically. We have first the implicit distrustful. So those are the ones that believe in God, but it's a conditional belief. So those are the ones who come to church, know God exists, but they still don't fully and truly trust God. Alito describes four types of them. So you have the ones that always refute science because they believe in God through his dogmas. So they believe in God because it was something imposed onto them, So they refute everything that science has to say, right? It's not a reasoned trust in God, but something that was imposed on them. You have the conditional love, where I love God because everything's good in my life. But then when something bad happens and I go through something serious, then my love for God is shaken, or I start to be mad at God because now my life is not as good as it used to be. So it's a conditional love. So that shows that I don't really trust Him. The other one is the churchgoers. So I keep going to church, so God will give me good things in life. Right? So it's that bargaining effect that we play with God. I'll keep going to church, and God will give me good things. And the last one, which is the result of all of the above, is a fearful God. Because I don't truly understand what God is, I fear it. So I go to church so something doesn't happen. I'm always fearing what God will do to me. So I try to stay in the right path with that fear in my mind. So that means that's the implicit distrustful. So that applies to it could apply to many of us who go to church and already know God exists, but we're still not fully trusting Him. The other one is the explicit unbeliever. So these are mostly the atheists or the nihilists who don't believe in God explicitly. And again, there's four. Anita describes four of these. And the first one talks about the Big Bang, so how science has the Big Bang theory of how the world started and existed. And he makes an analogy with the artificial flower. So just to explain what this is the Big Bang is basically a pool of matter, inorganic matter, that for billions of years compressed itself and then exploded and gave birth to the universe. The artificial flower is something that Alidjo talks about, how artificial flowers nowadays, they've become really, really nice. You can look at them and you think they're real. You get close to them, you still think they're real. You have to touch or even try to smell it to see the difference. But it's all plastic. It came from petroleum, from oil, from something really crude. So the analogy that he does is the pool of oil, did the molecules just get together and at one point exploded and became something so well crafted like an artificial flower? No, it didn't. It required the intelligence of humans to create something from something so crude and make it something so intricate. The same applies to the Big Bang in terms of creating something that has no life in inorganic matter, from that creating something organic like humans, something so perfectly crafted. So we're not refuting the Big Bang. This is not, we're not saying we're creationists. That's not the point. But we're just saying that they're behind an intelligent effect, like creating a human being. There's always an intelligence cause, which in this case would be God. The other type of unbeliever is the deep inside that our leader says. We're all sons and daughters of God. Deep inside, deep inside, we know that. Even the atheists, sometimes when they go through something harsh in their lives, they might look up. They might pray. They might know that something bigger exists. So deep inside, depending on the scenario, they might turn to God. So they know it exists. The third one that Alita talks about is the type of God, and why there's so many atheists still. Suffer sentences people to have a good life. So they think God is that, and that's why it's really hard to believe in it, because it doesn't make any sense. And then the last one is Francis Collins, who Alita brings him up because he's a scientist and a very renowned scientist. He's the director of the States, appointed by the president, a very renowned scientist who was actually one of the leaders of the Genome Project, which is a project that took 10 years to sequence the entire DNA of our own DNA of humans. And in the end of his of this genome project, he wrote a book. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. But then at the end of the project, he wrote a book called The Languages of God. A scientist presents evidence of belief. Because once he looked at the genome, all those 30,000 genes, he realized that it's too perfect to have happened from chance. There must have been an intelligence behind this. It's too perfect, which led him to start believing in God, which is why he wrote the book, right? So a very renowned scientist went from an unbeliever to start trusting God. So you might be thinking, why am I talking about DNA? What does that have to do with anxiety? Well, the mistrust that we have in God, right? That leads us again to move away from God, which will generate the uncertainty, which generates the anxiety. So for us to trust God, the first thing we need to do is to reason it out. Right? First, we reason that it exists. We read about it. We understand the proofs that show that God exists, which is what we talked about now. Once we know it exists, then we can start to feel it and can start to live with God. But it starts with the reason, which is why we brought this up. And the next one is, do we trust God? There's three major things that I'll talk about today, and we can use to try and gauge how is our trust in God, if we fully trust Him. The first one is the law of cause and effect. How do we see the law of cause and effect? Do we see it as a punishment, or do we see it something to protect us? So when I don't understand the law of cause and effect, so when I don't believe in God, I see this law as something that's out there to punish me. It's something out there to make me feel pain, right? Or if I do understand the law of God, the law of cause and effect, if I trust God, I realize instead of a punishment, it's actually a protection. It's out there to protect us from our own bad inclinations. If we don't have this law, we start doing something bad and we'll keep doing it over and over and over again. So it's here to protect us from our own self. And Alito says that sometimes when we do something bad, we don't realize how bad it is until we feel it. Once we're on the other side, instead of doing something bad, we're now receiving something bad. That's when we truly realize how bad it is. And then we decide to change. We decide to do it less. Trusting God would be trusting that He has our best interest in mind. So the law of cause and effect is something to protect us. The second one is, how do we pray? When we pray, are we making a list for God? Are we making a list of wishes? Right? I want this, 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 and this. And then if I don't get what I want, I start mad at God. Right? So if I am doing that, I still don't fully trust God. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make my will prevail as opposed to God's will. Right? The other thing is, for others, are we wanting them to change? Are we making a list of how they should be? Right? And here is where we're going against something that Jesus taught us in the Lord's Prayer. When He said, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done." So the will of God be done. Right? So Jesus was telling us how to pray, wishing that the will of God be done, not our will. Right? Jesus Himself said, God's will be done, not even His will, but God's. So who are we to want something to change because we think it should change as opposed to letting God's will prevail? So when we pray, we can ask for God to give us the strength to go through our experiences, to go through our trials and expiations, as opposed to wanting something. And the third one is omnipotence. Do we feel sometimes that we are omnipotent? And so this is when we don't accept our mission. So we don't submit to our own mission. We don't submit to God's will, and we try and own the things that are, or we try to refute our experiences because we don't think God has our best interest in mind. Right? We feel that we have the power, that we know it all. Right? So I start to decide what I want, as opposed to submitting to my own mission. The thing is, we can't be omnipotent. That's something that only God can be. So we either become impotent or prepotent, or both, right? We usually go from one to the other quite often. The impotent is the person that doesn't believe they're capable of anything. They just don't think they can do. The prepotent is the complete opposite, when they think they can do everything. I think that they have the power to change everything and everyone. And that might lead them to actually feel rejected at one point. We can relate to this likely when we start to think that at home I do everything, or at church or at work I do everything, but nobody recognizes it. Nobody's affected from that environment. We start to feel rejected from the universe. And because it's something so prevalent in our society, including, I'm assuming all of us have some sort of this feeling. We'll talk a little bit more about it. And there's three things that Alito describes. There is the pessimist feeling, the unprotected, and the confrontational. So when we're prepotent and talking about anxiety, we're always projecting something negative. Right? We're always thinking something negative. If things are good right now, there's something really bad coming up around the corner. Right? Everything is very dramatic. Everything is very agitated, generating an anxiety, right? And then this leads us to the unprotected. Because I feel that I'm better than God, I no longer feel that God is there to protect me. So if something bad happens, I don't feel that I'll have God's protection with me. So that, again, brings me to the anxiety of not being able to go through anything bad that might come into my life. And the third one is the confrontational. So it's when I'm trying to change everything and everything. And when I meet somebody who's an impotent, or who drives by the impotent feeling, they usually stay quiet. But inside, their rage is building. Whereas when a prepotent meets a prepotent, then you have both trying to change each other, and then it becomes a confrontation. Right? It's a big clash between the two. And this all generates a toxic environment, right? And which something that we can see quite often is that can generate a lot of diseases. And it all comes from wanting to be prepotent, right? Trying to change the world, trying to change everybody, generating this anxiety within ourselves. And that can lead us to have some quite serious diseases, because it's a very toxic environment that we are creating. Now, where does this come from? Alito says in our reasoning, in the reasoning that we have when we reflect about life, where we face, our ego faces some temptations that we succumb to these temptations, such as the feeling of privilege. We want our life to be the best ones, our friends and our family. We don't necessarily care about others, but I want my life to be awesome. So that's the feeling of privilege. I think I'm privileged over others. That leads us to feel the superficiality, because I'm not going with the divine laws because I'm thinking I'm better than anybody else. I live a superficial life. Then all the wants and needs that I have are very material. They're no longer essential. This superficiality creates in the infallibility. Infallibility is I'm capable of everything. I can't make mistakes. So that is another name for perfectionism. And I think I'm perfect. I'm better than anybody else. And it's interesting because when I think I'm better than anybody else, I think I deserve privilege, right? So then it becomes a non-ending cycle, and it all comes from this feeling of prepotent, feeling better than everybody else. So then let's move on to the process of transformation. So we have a triad here. This is only the first one of the morning. So we have me, an immortal spirit, and then we have the divine laws, then we have God. We have these three transformation. And then we think about what can we change? Can we change God and the divine laws? We can certainly try, but we can't. Trying to change these to be better than these will cause the anxiety that we started talking about. So instead of trying to change this, we surrender to them. We realize that we're fragile. God and the divine laws are something that I have to follow, that shouldn't be changed. So I surrender to them. Instead of wasting energy trying to change them, I surrender to them. And then the action, I actually spend my energy trying to change what I can, which is me, right? The immortal spirit. And will help us see, for example, anxiety of something that can be transformed if I use the divine laws. If I feel the trust in God, I feel protected from God, with God. I'm no longer afraid. I can use the apprentice feeling that the divine laws and God teaches me to understand that if I make mistakes, I am able to make them, to turn my mistakes, turn my ego, my ignorance into a virtue. So I got 2 more slides left, and this is on developing serenity. So we'll go into a more detailed approach into developing serenity, which is the virtue that is the opposite of anxiety. So in order to transform our anxiety, we should be able to develop our serenity. And we're going to look at the expectations that we have on everything that we do. Right? On every action that we do, we always expect something back. So we can expect something from our ego or from our essential being, from the ego or from the self. So we'll look at both. The first one is the egoic path, which is the lack of apprentice feeling. Right? I think my will is the one that should be prevail. That leads me to disrespect the divine laws because I think I am better than the divine laws. This causes me to demand my expectations to be met, which they won't, right? Because I know I can't disrespect the divine laws. They are immutable, and I'm something that can be changed. So eventually I'll realize that these expectations cannot be met. This will lead me to frustration and anxiety because the things that I want, I won't get. So this will lead me to frustration and being anxious and uncertain about the future. On the essential side, so the apprentice feeling as an apprentice of life, succumbing to God's mission for me. I will love and respect the divine laws. Instead of trying to go against it, I'll love and respect it. This will lead me to something that Aliyah called assured surrender, that expectations will be met. So I know deep inside that all my expectations will be met because now my expectations are essential. My expectation with the divine laws, which is gratitude and serenity, because all my expectations will be met. So I'll be grateful towards the experiences that I have because I know that I can always learn from it. And the apprentice feeling, it starts with studying, right? We're trying to understand the divine laws, which is what we're doing right now. Then we go from the studying to the reflecting. Then I start to think about them, reflect about them in my life. And then eventually we have those aha moments when we realize, oh, actually, this makes sense. This is what God's trying to teach me. And then I go and do it. So we have the challenging and the motivating experiences. If I look at all these experiences with an apprentice feeling, I realize that all of them are there for me to learn. I can either get it right or I can get it wrong. If I got it right, it's a success. Great, I was doing it right. If it's not, if I got it wrong, well, that's a learning experience. Let's go back and reflect upon it. What can I learn from it? What should I have done differently? And they both will follow the divine laws, developing our essential virtues. Even if I got it right, it's still a step closer to developing our virtues. And this, again, generates that state of gratitude, which is the virtue of the month. It's the state of gratitude that knowing that everything that I go through in life is for my own benefit. So every day I thank God for having those experiences because they are in my best interest. So I want to leave with told us, walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. Every day we wake up and we have an entire day to create light. We can emanate light through our thoughts, through our actions, through our choices, through our feelings, right? We have a full day to make that choice. So taking upon our daily burden that we have, transforming our anxiety towards our own life. So every day is a new day that I can feel grateful for having this burden that will only make me a better person. So that's all I have for today. And I rushed a little bit because we started late. So I don't want you to get too all hungry and anxious about the lunch. But do you guys have any questions or any comments that you want to bring up? Or are you just all really hungry?
I would like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inciting us to our anxiousness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm pretty sure that one of us here are masters of serenity.
Yes.
And this is all about spiritism, right?
Mhm.
Spiritism is a way to find the light inside. And many people criticize self-help, auto-ajuda. This is the gospel of self-help, auto-ajuda. And finding serenity through Jesus' words and finding serenity through spiritist teachings help us to achieve self-knowledge and the self-development. So thank you very much for the words, and it's very important. This is probably one of the worst tendencies of our society. Our world right now stimulates anxiety in people. And we act with anxiety all the time. And we don't figure out that serenity is the virtue of anxiety.
Yeah, it's become a normal almost.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It's an anxious world.
Yeah, definitely. And also to build upon the self-knowledge that you talked about, Spiritism also helps us understand God and trust God, which will help us give us the strength to go through our burden, right? Even though we know ourselves, we still need that trust to help us.
And then it connects to so many other virtues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like faith,
Mm-hmm.
like gratitude, resignation. Because to be an apprentice demands a lot of resignation. Because I will make a mistake, I will figure it out, and then I will have to do it again and again until I master it. It is not easy. It is hard work.
Yeah, it takes effort, takes time. There's nothing that we can't do. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And I guess we're all ready for some food. Yes. You're free.
Well, I don't think we have anything from there. We'll double check, otherwise we're done. I will collect the pass.
Oh, okay.
Victor,
Yes.
why you choose the guy with like white hair to represent God?
They think of God as still that person that's up high and dictating what's good and what's bad, who should suffer and who should not. And that's something really hard to trust on. Right? So that's why I chose it, because that was the representation of people who still think God is an old man. Right? Now, when we think of God as something loving, something that's there to help us and not punish us, it's a lot easier to trust. Right? Does it make sense?
Good thing.
Yeah. Oh, right. Do you have your phone? Yeah, that.
Eu vou fazer um passo coletivo.
Ah, já faz a prayer.
We'll do something a little different, I guess. We're just Portuguese speakers, então a gente pode fazer em português. Vamos fazer a nossa passo coletivo